Right, everybody, welcome to the SASS Meetup on the 5th of June, 2022. Do we need humanism in South Africa? Here is your host, Wilhelm Van Zyl. Wilhelm.
Good morning. The question is, how can we live a better life? If you have ever pondered that question and you're thinking about it, is there a way that we can know how to live a better life? Then there's a lot of people out there that tells us that there's all kinds of things and all kinds of organizations and all kinds of philosophies that we can follow. But how do you know whether that is a good, that will actually produce the results of you living a better life? So for me, humanism is what I think we need in South Africa, right? Now, the question is why? What is humanism about? Now, I understand that we can all Google stuff nowadays. I mean, anybody that joined this meeting could have gone to Google and type in the question and ask, what is humanism? And you get all kinds of definitions and all kinds of people that's trying to explain it to you on all kinds of levels. Some very technical, some is trying to have it more for the layman interpretation and all these things. And that's what I did myself before, as I prepared for this meeting. I decided to go in and have a look and see what does the other people say what humanism is about. And although I found that they explain it quite well, I mean, probably better than what I can explain it, I do find that you almost have to understand what humanism is all about before you really understand what they are saying in their definitions and things. So I thought that we should have this meetup in SASS so that we can have a debate. And remember, this meetup is a debate. It's not just a one-way platform for me to talk about it. It is for us all to join in and have a debate on what do you see humanism, or if you have questions about it, or how will it impact your life, how will it change your life, what it's all about. By having that, to get down to the crux of what it means. How will it affect your life? How can you make your life better? How can you go out there in the world and stand up for your values, your morals, and change the world you live in? So for me, the question about humanism is, how should I live? How can I know what is true? How should I treat others? And what kind of world do I want? If you ponder these questions, then for me, humanism is the moral system, the belief system, the way that you should view and can make sense of the world you live in. Now, SASS was created for the non-religious in South Africa, to represent the non-religious. And what we find is that a lot of our members are atheists. And yet, when you talk to them about their moral views and moral stance, they very much have humanist values in it. But it's almost, I get the feeling that they either don't really understand what humanism is all about. That's why they identify themselves as atheists and not as humanists. And what I find is that atheism is a negative definition of yourself. I mean, you're basically saying that you're just not convinced about the supernatural, the deities and things. It's a very narrow definition of who you are and what you are. It doesn't tell people anything else about you. Whereas for me, humanism is more a positive story. This is where you explain to people, if you say you're a humanist, you explain to people, what is your moral values? What do you value? How do you go about in the world? Interacting with the world and the people around you. How do you want to make the world better? That for me is what humanism is. So for me, humanism has got an aim, right? The goal of humanism, and then what it is based on, right? So And here's the thing, when we talk about the goal of humanism, it is actually, you could have sat there yourself and determined the goal yourself. You could have sat there and say, I would like to live in a world that this is the goal of the world. Anybody can make it up themselves. You need to find the purpose of you in the world you live in. Right, but there's a lot of purposes that you can come up with that might be very negative or very harmful. Even maybe it sounds good in the short term to you, but in the long term, it could be very harmful. So by looking around and thinking, what is the best goal of life for either you, the people around you, the community you live in, on a short-term basis, on a long-term basis. If you take all of this into account, one of the best goals I have found is the promotion of well-being. If we can put humans in the center of it, and we can say the objective is well-being, to make society better. I think about like somebody like Nelson Mandela and the dream that he set out for South Africa. It was a dream where we treat each other with respect. It's a dream where our children have a better future than what we had. These are all the goal, all for me encapsulated in the one word, well-being. So by having that as the goal, then you can ask yourself, okay, so if we then develop a moral system and a belief system and things, how do we know that the moral values that we are going to implement, or the ideas and the rules and the laws will actually achieve it? How do you know that? Like, you find so many politicians out there in the world, they just list a bunch of problems and they go like, yeah, and if you vote for me, I'll solve them. How do you know that? How do you know what is true? How do you know that you can achieve the goal? And by looking at things like outcome, if you look at the facts, if you look at what has happened, what has other societies achieved, if you analyze it, if you look at things like science, like critical thinking, rational analysis, all of these things is tools that you can use to evaluate whether the ideas, the moral values, the laws is actually achieving the well-being for the society, either for the individual, the community, or the country as a whole. We can actually measure these things. There's now enough countries in the world where we can see what they have done and how they achieved it. So for me, the goals of humanism is the promotion of well-being, the creation of a community, a place where we can belong, we as non-believers, a place where we can collaborate. This is what we're trying to achieve through humanism, through organizations like SASS, a space where we can freely express ourselves, especially in our non-religious perspective. Change, we also have to promote in ourselves and in the people around us a change in behavior, a place where we can educate ourselves, where we can debate, where we can talk, so that we can implement a change in behavior, whether it's a change in behavior in ourselves or in the people around us. And having a platform where we can openly debate these things and talk about it and learn, like, why do we as humanists have certain moral values? Why? What is the purpose of it? How do we know it's true? How do we know it is delivering on what it is? Understanding these things in a deeper level makes us more able to be either to defend ourselves when people question us out there in the real world, or to bring up our moral values when we see things that's happening around us that is immoral. And my personal experience is that so many religions and out there and denominations, especially denominations, have watered themselves so much down because they have realized that humanist moral values are some of the best and most successful moral values there is. And they are actually incorporating this into their religion. So when you stand up for your humanist moral values, when you bring it up in society, I definitely find that people do not shun us, but they actually embrace us and say, yeah, that's true. But still, as believers, how do they know that the way they implement it will lead to their desired outcome of creating a society of where well-being for the people is important? And I think this is also a debate that they always shun from. You know, they have feelings about things, they have beliefs about things, but they don't aspire to truth. They don't want to work out, why is it true? How do you know it? You know, we have developed something like science, which is one of the best methodologies the world, mankind has ever devised to work out what is true and how do we know it. And through science, we could make predictions that comes true and immensely accurately. And then engineers could go and take those truths and build the products around us. They could build for us medicines that healing us, dyes that don't wash out of our clothes, airplanes that fly, things that prolong our lives. We are living the best lives humans have ever lived because a product like, because of a methodology like science was able to work out what is true and how do we know it. And for me, humanism is the equivalent almost of science, but that is more on a moral and a belief system level. We can now say we have moral values that we know is delivering on our goal, the goal of well-being of humankind. We have also made mistakes in humanism. For instance, in the beginning, humanism was very much only human-centric and not really concentrating on nature and the environment we live in. Then we realize, you know, we are dependent on the environment we live in. If we mess up nature, we might perish with it. So even though humanism is concentrating on the well-being of the human, we also as humanists see us very much a part of the world and nature that we live in. If we mess up nature, we might perish with it. We are not independent from nature. We are part of nature. We are from nature. We were just the lucky offspring of the most successful creatures that came through evolution and that have the opposable thumb and the most understanding of the world we live in. We were just lucky. So yeah, that is my perspective on humanism, the ideas that I would like to share here. Why do we want to live like that? And what is the goal? It is based on well-being, or the goal is well-being, and it's based on what do we know is true? What do we know is working? Is there anybody that have any questions? Anybody that would like to add anything to the discussion, just maybe put up your hand, click somewhere. Sorry, Julie, are you talking? Because I think you're mute at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. Long time no see.
Yes.
Nice to see you again. I just want to pick up on the point you made that religion seems to come after the event, after the world is starting to decide that something is wrong. Then the church lags behind for such a long time before it adopts that particular wisdom that the world has already, that let's say humans and humanists have already decided is worthwhile adopting. The church really conspicuously, for me, lags behind. It's not for me a leader at all. I mean, do you agree?
I mean, very much. I remember still as a child, when they came up with NG Kerk, that's where I grew up in, like a staunch Afrikaans conservative environment where I grew up in. And they brought up the idea of divorce. Now, the Bible clearly says, divorce is not accepted. And people in the church said, well, these divorcees, they're not welcome. And as a child, I think I was in primary school. The next moment, the church just goes like, yeah, no, they're welcome in the church. And I realized they run the numbers, and they realized about half their congregation is going to be divorced. They're going to lose them. So it's like a numbers game, They ran the numbers and realized if we don't change our view, our moral values, the core of our beliefs, we're making ourselves irrelevant.
Yes.
So I think for them, it's that simple.
Yes. It's like there are many examples, but the acceptance of women as preachers, the gay marriage, etc. All these things, the church is very slow to all agree and accept and take that step. If I were in the church, I would be terribly embarrassed that the church is so slow.
I saw Pragashni joined us.
Hi, Wilhelm. Hi, everybody. I just want to touch on what Wilhelm said about the word atheism and humanism. And I think Wilhelm and I had this discussion that a lot of people will identify with being atheist because the word humanism is associated almost with being humanitarian. So it doesn't, like I'm a humanist, but I always often tell people I'm atheist because if I say humanist, I tend to say, oh, okay, it's humanitarian. So they don't know that fine line between that, what, you're a humanist and you're doing things without religion, or you're not following religion, to that effect. So I think the semantics is very like it's a fine line between saying someone you're atheist or a humanist is because of what people kind of like believe what a humanist is. So they say that a humanist is somebody that's can follow religion and be humanist at the same time. So I think that is why people just they identify as atheist and not fully as a humanist. Does that make sense? Can't hear you, Wilhelm.
Sorry, I've got myself on mute. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm very much open to somebody explaining to me why our community is so into describing themselves as atheists, even though they have seems to largely implemented or adhere to humanist moral values, humanist views, humanist thing. I don't understand it. I mean, I must be.
I kind of understand.
I'm not a big people's person, so maybe things like that eludes me. So I'm definitely open to other people's views.
Yes, I kind of understand it because I tell people I'm a humanist, and it's difficult to explain to them that I'm not part of a religion and I'm not following a religion, and actually I'm an atheist that believes in all the humanist factors or humanism factors. So that's, it's very difficult to tell people, for them to just identify humanism as just being without religion. That's what I personally found.
Right, I'm gonna go through people that put up their hands. But unfortunately, I didn't see who was first and who was second, so I'm just going to pick them as they appear in the list. When you are not talking, I'll put people on mute, and when I ask you, I'll take you hopefully off mute or ask you the question, or click on the button that says ask you to switch on your mic. So I'm going to start with Claire.
Yes, good morning. I find very interesting, and I agree with defining oneself negatively, I am not a believer, instead of positively, I am something, I completely agree with you. However, I agree with your scientific approach. Why not also trying to find out, why do human beings have values? What is the aim? What is the goal of having values? Why do we have values and not the animals? Okay, and if we go to this first, perhaps you can more easily define what humanism mean, or you know what I mean. Why do we have values? Why?
That's a very good question. I mean, maybe we should ask other people, because my thing is that we intrinsically have no value. If we were to wipe out humanity, the galaxies and all these things, they will keep on going. I mean, they don't really mind. If you look at space out there, it is hostile to life. I mean, look how much effort we have to put in to get the people on the International Space Station to live. It's not like the universe is sitting there and go like, oh man, look, I have there in this little cradle, humans living on Earth. Isn't that wonderful? So for me, we don't have an intrinsic value. Therefore, we have to value ourselves. Like for me, life almost have only one goal, and that's to procreate. Like without the procreation, there is no more, that species cease to exist, and that's over. So, and I understand that that's a very bleak view. That's maybe somebody like me that don't get emotional about these things, that we as humans don't have intrinsic value. And I also think the other mistake that a lot of people make, and that's why they go for religion, is they sit in a situation where they think, I'm important. Like, you know, you can make the argument that through the path of evolution, every one of your ancestors was successful in procreating, like without fail. Like there's not one of your ancestors that failed to be attractive enough to attract a mate, to be strong enough to survive in a very hostile dog-eat-dog world. So therefore, you must have value, right? But then on the other hand, if you think about the chances of you surviving or you being there, it's actually just like a random chance. Like even if you just go to the sperm and the egg situation, you're just lucky. And it's only when you start realizing how insignificant you are that I think you can clearly come to the conclusion, we need to create our own value. We need to understand that we have no value and that we need to create it. We have an impact in the world. I mean, humans are now so much that we actually, it's like a force of nature. We can move more soil on Earth than erosion can. This is how powerful humans have become. We can shape the world, we can change the world, and therefore we have to give value to ourselves. And unfortunately, a lot of people, if you go selfish about it, you can give a value that is more harmful than productive. That's more harmful than achieving well-being. This is why it is so important to have, as a humanist, to clearly understand what's going on. Claire, that's my explanation of it. Do you think it's a good one? Do you think it's a bit harsh? Do you think it's a bit cold?
So you mean humans have values in order to biologically be able to prosper?
Intrinsically.
Yeah.
Intrinsically,
okay.
That's it.
It's rational. It's rational. Yeah. Okay.
Intrinsically. The rest of your value, you have to give to yourself. You have to value yourself and what part you play in your society. But intrinsically, yeah, you have very little value. David, you had your hand up for a long time.
Hi, thanks everyone. I agree with everything that's been said. Just in terms of the topic that sort of drew my attention, do we need humanism in South Africa? And it's something that I've thought a lot about. Also coming from a religious background, sort of rejecting religion. I think that there's a potential that when I look at broader society, should we get everyone to reject religion? And my conclusion has come to sort of no, because I feel like religion, especially in the South African context, gives people hope. And that's why I feel we need to replace it with something. And if you can say to somebody, there is an alternative, which is based on being good and that humans are intrinsically good and helping others, rather than saying the lack of religion, or no, your religion's wrong, or you must drop your religion, but rather to say you can still have all those values that you have, except you don't need all the supernatural, etc., that comes with it, all the rules that come with it. You can actually follow your gut and how you would feel that people should benefit in the here and now, and stop spending your whole life worrying about what's going to happen in your afterlife. So that was just an angle that would be great to explore.
Yes, I mean, I definitely agree with you. We also need to cover the situation of humanism in South Africa and why that is important. But when you start talking to people, let's say of other religions, you can't get yourself into a situation where all religions have like moral values and things like that, and they're all equal. Maybe one is trying to argue that their deity is like a better Superman than Batman, or whatever that story is that they do. But and this is the point I would like to make very clear in when we as humanists talk to each other and when we share ideas and trying to educate each other. Our system, our moral values is not equivalent to the religious ones. It is not, because we use things like science and facts and reality to determine what is the good and best moral value. If you come to a humanist with an idea, you say, I think we should implement this moral value. The first thing a humanist should ask you, how do you know it's going to achieve well-being? Where's the evidence for it? Show me that it is done. Just because you either point out a problem, which is something that some politicians love, they just list problems and say, vote for me and I'll fix them. Just because you list problems does not mean that your opinion, your moral views, your ideas as valid or will solve the problem. We as humanists have a track record of creating a better world, a world where we value well-being of the humans. And this is why, if you look at institutions like the United Nations, they are implementing things like human rights, democracy. These are all cornerstones and things that we have seen can deliver on well-being. So I think for us as humanists, even though we want to go out there and talk to other people, like you say, it is important for us to understand what is the core of humanism and why it is superior to their moral systems. What do you think about that, David?
No, I completely agree, but there's something that I have sort of learned about humanists or atheists to start with, is they started by questioning. They looking at saying, well, does this fundamentally make sense? No, and then you sort of break it down to the point where like, okay, well, you realize that this is illogical. But that I think does give a lot of people despair or the lack of hope, which is something that maybe religion gave them as a child. And there's maybe a large majority who actually don't go to the trouble of even challenging, the logic around it. And that's why I say humanism can really offer an alternative hope. And while for you and I, we want to fundamentally understand that there's a logic to it and how did we get to it, and that actually what we're basing our key morals on are something that's going to be productive at the end of it. Whereas unfortunately, there are many people who actually aren't all that bothered about the science behind it. They just want something to cling to. And then that's where I feel humanism can at least then give somebody an alternative while they work through, the understanding of why they're doing something and the sort of science behind why they're doing it.
One of the things that I have learned in debates, when you're debating a person, is you should never make the mistake of thinking they think like you. And it's like you say, just because you value things like facts, that they value it. Just because you're open-minded doesn't mean they are open-minded, even though they'll always bring it up first. So yes, and this is why I'm also saying, as humanists in South Africa, if we want to change South Africa, we have to have the ability to craft our message so that we can communicate with a religious person that comes to the, let's call it the end result of their moral values in a totally different way than we did. So we need to, and that I think is the obstacle that we need to resolve if we want to change a country like South Africa. Is how do we communicate with people that don't think like us? How do we craft our message for people that don't think like us? Okay.
So I just want to make one more point on that, is the fundamental belief in the supernatural. And I think that's a difficult one for me, is if somebody fundamentally believes in the supernatural, then they're going to look for a supernatural deity. So that's often where my argument starts with it. Personally, I got to the conclusion that there was no supernatural, and then beyond that, it's easier. But I think that's a hurdle that would be quite a difficult one to overcome in our country, where there's a lot of superstition and belief in the supernatural.
Right, Matheri, I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you did.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I think you opened up the floor by asking why we don't define ourselves as humanists, as opposed to saying we're atheists. And it goes back to the issue of what is humanism, which you defined, making it a better world for all humanity. And I think you brought in an environmental angle to it, which is pretty much a world view. And it's not necessarily, you could have an atheist who is not a humanist.
Yes, very much.
So now talking about that humanism and humanism and what it stands for, it becomes extremely important. And I don't know whether it's necessary for us to define ourselves in this context as humanists, because I think there was an issue: how do we define ourselves? But you could claim that I have a humanistic worldview, including, somebody like in my view, in my opinion, I think the current Pope has a very humanistic view of the world, and subscribes to many of the values of what we consider humanism to be, and espouses that using that big platform he has as a leader of a religious order. So I think I'm very comfortable defining myself as a humanist, and how you described it, I pretty much align with that. And that's my contribution as far as it's concerned.
So my question to you is, when I look at Nelson Mandela and the things that he said, would you consider him to be a humanist or not? Because remember now, he was talking to people in a very heated debate, like the apartheid government, right? And these people were staunchly religious. So if you go to them and you say to them, listen, I'm a humanist, they're going to think you like Satan has arrived. So that's maybe why he never said the words. But when you look at how he spoke in speeches and the things he said, I never really saw speeches when he said, I am religious, I am this and this. But all his values and views were very humanist. So how do you see that?
My understanding of humanism, he definitely fits that bill very, very much. And the point of departure, when it comes to humanism, is when you look at a person, do you first see a human being before you start breaking them down into all these other categories, who has got the same sort of set of values, a set of needs, wants, fears, basically what defines the beauty and the mishmash of a human being. Do you see that in the person that you look at in the face, before you realize, oh, he's white, he's black, oh, he's a Christian, he's not, he's an atheist. And after you do that, then of course, do you wish well? Do you want the best for that person in the circumstances that they find themselves? Mandela fitted that bill perfectly. I think he found himself at a point in history where he could really influence massive change in a society that he found himself in. That was hugely unequal, treated other human beings badly, unequally, and so on and so forth, and brought that force. And I think that authority, that moral authority, anchored, I would dare say, in humanism, allowed progress to be made, that there could be a relatively peaceful transition to a more just society. Still a lot of work to be done, but it allowed that transition. So to answer your question, yes, Mandela fits that bill perfectly.
So if you say that, then isn't because the question that I find is that a lot of people that have humanist moral values don't want to identify as humanists, right? So isn't that almost an example of how a person could function in a religious world without having to specifically identify themselves as a humanist, but they definitely stood up for the humanist moral values?
I'm not sure I caught your question fully. Are you saying that Mandela or there are people who are reluctant to define themselves as humanists, yet they espouse humanistic values based on how we define them, or I define them? Is that what you're saying? That they are reluctant to do so?
More a question of, if you are a person that is,
Yes.
let's say you're a humanist, but you don't like the label. You
Right.
find maybe the label is not a good idea in a country where 80% of the people is Christian, 90% is religious. You find yourself in a society that if you identify as a humanist, maybe there could be repercussions. People could shun you, people could turn on you. There could be real repercussions. But yet, in that hostile environment, there is a way that you can stand up for your humanist moral values without having to necessarily openly define you. You can still shape the conversation. You can still change people's views. You can still interact with the world around you without the label.
Yes, that's correct. And sometimes, sometimes defining oneself in a certain environment, you can cause a certain degree of angst that disables you in terms of trying to achieve what you want to do. For if you have to talk about homosexuality, as somebody coming in an environment where they are fairly homophobic people, and you start trying to address a certain issue or instill certain change by first defining yourself as that, you probably will not be very successful. The same thing as many people, I don't think, even have an idea what humanism is all about. And if you define yourself as a humanist in very many contexts in South Africa, I don't think people, really know. But the moment you say you're an atheist or you don't believe in, religion, organized religion, you already alienate yourself and maybe not achieve what you need to achieve. I agree. You can, based on the values that you hold, moral or otherwise, be able to drive through a message of it to influence or to change circumstances for the better without coming with your label, without saying where you really come from in terms of the labels that people attach in their heads with respect to various categories that we find ourselves in this world. So I'm not sure whether, taking a label and labeling yourself, and that's why I'm struggling with us, or I don't know whether if I say us, it's this group, to come out and define yourself as a humanist or an atheist or whatever. It becomes very, very difficult, and there are very many viewpoints as to how people see themselves in any context. You could espouse certain worldviews that are common in a group of people who call themselves that, and you can say, well, I fit into that group very much as far as that worldview is concerned. But you could have other worldviews that do not necessarily align with that. And that's why I mentioned you could actually be of Christian faith or Hindu faith or Muslim faith and still be a humanist, and vice versa. So that's my struggle in terms of trying to find a definitive label as an alternative to either atheism or any other faith.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Rael, your turn. You've had your hand up for a while.
All right. So yeah, last week so I'm in London at the moment. So last week I spoke to the Central London Humanists. I asked them some questions. So I mean, anyone's on our chat group on Telegram, you would have seen that post on their responses. I think some key takeaways that apply to this conversation is that, I mean, firstly, humanism is a belief system. It's a moral system. You know, there are values that are humanist values that you can positively assert. You know, unlike atheism, which tells you what you don't believe, humanism, you know, says what you do believe. I think in the South African context, it can be a useful umbrella, especially considering the fact that most of South Africa is religious in some way. And so approaching conversations from the fact that, well, I just reject what you believe can be quite antagonistic. I think that's particularly true if you use the term atheist to kind of describe yourself. You can end up getting into arguments. So I think it's far easier to be shunned or dismissed as an atheist than a humanist. Because I think with humanism, you're actually putting something on the table. And I think another thing I was mentioned earlier, that a lot of people don't know what a humanist is. So I think more people would be reluctant to just dismiss something they don't even know. And then in terms of, you know, how do you know what is true and what is right? I think humanism has some value here in that it adopts a reason-based approach, you know, as opposed to faith-based. The key thing, my takeaway was that it rejects superstition. And as such, you know, unlike other belief systems where there's a position, you know, the Catholic Church takes a position on a given topic, humanists can differ in the way that they answer a particular question. They could be like pro-life humanists, they can be pro-choice humanists on the abortion debate. But the actual conversation is not going to be around what does scripture tell us, or you know, what was revealed to me in my sleep. It allows for that diverse range of views, but the conversation itself will be reason-based, science-based, evidence-based, and that's the key difference. And then on the whole human-centric thing, I think if you just take the term humanism, it's without reading anything and not Googling anything, it can appear to be human-centric and maybe even selfish. But I think anyone who even just reads the definition of humanism, it's quick to kind of just see that because of the focus on facts and all of that, it doesn't exclude any focus on the environment or animal protection. And I think the term humanism is useful in the same way that we talk about human rights. You know, humanism refers to human values. Someone said it quite well when I spoke to the London Humanists, and he said, I don't know what dolphin values are. If I did, maybe we could come up with a different term than humanism. So until then, we stuck with humanism. And that would apply if, you know, intelligent aliens showed up as well. We would have to revisit the term. But until then, humanism, I think, fits quite well. I don't think we need to kind of choose between the labels of atheism and humanism, because I think they address different questions. I mean, again, humanism tells you what you do believe in terms of your values, but atheism tells you, you know, what you don't. And so it's answers to different questions. You know, if someone says, do you believe in a God? You can answer with atheism, but say like, what are your values? You can answer with humanism. So different questions, I think. And in terms of it being difficult to explain, I think it's difficult to explain your beliefs and values in general. It's a difficult thing to do. We don't do it normally. So that's a roadblock for whichever label you're going to adopt, whether it's atheism, humanism. If you're a believer, it's hard. So I think, yeah, we should factor that in, but I think that's more a practical consideration than anything else. I think overall, I went into the discussions last week quite skeptical of humanism, but what I saw at the group was that there were a whole lot of people who kind of were like-minded. They shared my values. And I think this is something that could benefit South Africa in that, as you know, SASS has looked at marriage offices, and we look at like certain rituals and community things like meetups like this, or even if it's something more casual, like if as things open up and want to have a braai or something, or you want to know like, well, I'm not part of a religion, but how do I have a funeral? You know, humanists have templates. They have ideas on this. Here in the UK, they have people who actually do that for you. If you're looking for particular lawyers or certain guidance in respect of dealing with religious matters, it's easy to use the term humanist to kind of collect all those individuals and have a common place of reference. So that community, I think, could also be a benefit. But yeah, throw that back to you now.
Thank you. So you brought up a few quite interesting points, and I hope I can still remember all of them to address it. But one of the things that I would really like to make clear, that is important for me to make clear to the audience, is that I don't think we should look at humanism as this fuzzy, all-inclusive umbrella, where we say anybody that's more or less have my same views, therefore their views is also just as valuable as my views. Let's, for instance, take examples of different debates. Right? Let's go for, let's push the boat out, because I see this is now a debate that have started popping up in South Africa. I don't want to call some new green political parties that's popping up with this thing, but let's say they say the crime is so high in South Africa, why don't we bring back the death penalty, right? And then when people bring up the death penalty, you have like all kinds of debates. You have to think about, what if we get it wrong and we execute the wrong person? It's not a mistake you can undo. At least if you lock the guy up forever and you then realize you made a mistake, you can bring him out of a prison. You have the debate about how do you justify that massive cost to keep somebody alive forever in, I would actually almost call it like they've got better medical service, and yet out there is the poor. So how do you have a debate about whether the death penalty should be in our society like that? And I think if you have that debate, you are already starting off at the wrong end of the spectrum when we have that debate. For me, it's the other way around. I would like to say, if I look around me and I look at societies, that is the type of societies where I want to live in. Let's say I want to go out of South Africa and language is not a barrier. Like by magic, I can go to any society in the world and speak their local lingo so I can fit in, which is the societies I would like to go live in, right? And if you look at those societies, do they have the death penalty? Like, and how does the societies look that does have the death penalty? For me, having that evidence of the outcome of how a society functions with or without the death penalty is actually, for me, the starting point of the debate, rather than whether having the death penalty is morally acceptable, yes or no. Because we know that governments must be able to apply force, even deadly force when required. We know when a criminal is running down the street, shooting his gun at everybody, we are going to ask for the police, which is a government representative, to stop that person, even if they have to use deadly force. So it's not like that we're against the use of deadly force by government. It is in a specific situation like the death penalty. But I do think we should start off at the end of what does that achieve? Raul, you'd like to add something to that debate.
Unmute. I agree with you on the reasoning for the death penalty, but I don't think that a humanist necessarily would approach that in the same way. I don't think that's necessary per se. I think it is possible for humanists to approach that particular question in a different way. I'm trying to think of one, but at the moment I can't. There's the risk there is that, like, as humanists, you can then say, well, there are certain political positions that are necessary, that a humanist must take. And I think not just my own view, but I think the view that of the humanists that I spoke to last week was that it shouldn't be a prerequisite, that there shouldn't be certain views apart from maybe keeping superstition and religion and dogma out of schools or something like that. Like anything along those lines probably would be the only sort of political positions that are consistent with the definition. But I think anything else should be open up for a reasoned debate. So I mean, if someone came up with the same argument and they said, well, there are countries with the death penalty, but I prefer them, and then you and that person end up having a debate, I think you can both still be humanists and have that debate. I just think maybe I am using a more broader definition of humanism then.
Right. Anybody else like to bring something to the floor or ask a question? Claire. Claire, you are on mute.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I think that the example of the death penalty is not an adequate one, because you have death penalty has been introduced as a deterrent to reduce, in fact, crimes. There have been countries where death penalty has been implemented, and then the same country where it has been stopped. And sociological analysis have shown that death penalty is not a deterrent. So all this discussion scientifically has no value, because we know scientifically it's not doing what is expected from it. Okay. What I find very interesting, and I think that I find very interesting, is what about conflict situation like pro-life or pro-choice approach? So in other words, we are speaking of something before defining it sufficiently. What are really these values we speak about as humanists? I think we have to start from that. How do we describe, how do we say yes, that's no? Yeah, how to go about in a more, scientific way on what you're speaking about. Thank you.
You see, that's a very, very good thing that you bring up about how do people define things. Because if you define it, in a lot of times, you end up in a thing like your definition is already too narrow, right? Like, for instance, you brought up the example of people for and against the death penalty, and they bring up, does it lower crime? Well, really, is lowering crime the only criteria you're going to use to define whether something that you have in the penal system is successful, yes or no? I would rather say, go for a much broader a description of that. Does it make your society safer? There's a huge difference between bringing down crime and making your society safer. So And this is what I also say, we can't also then have a situation where people pitch up with their beliefs. I'm saying, where's your evidence to back up your beliefs? Where's your evidence to show that your beliefs and your ideas lead to the outcome that we would all like to have? I mean, take for instance, the war on drugs. We have been fighting this war on drugs for how many years now? Decades, 50, 70 years. We have killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people all over the world. We have negatively affected it. How successful is the war on drugs? Really? You can go out and buy drugs in your street corner right now. In America, they, for instance, have the thing where they track the price of drugs as an indicator of how successful the police is. And what they found is every time when the police catches a big drug haul, the price goes up for a couple of days and then it comes down again. Why? Because supply was solved. The stuff is available. So now you sit with a situation where we have the war on drugs that's being implemented all over the world by all kinds of countries. Any country that steps out of line is shunned upon, sanctioned, and all kinds of things, and the thing don't work. And if you ask them, what is option B? They go like, let's try option A, we just tried harder. And that is because people, they view their feelings, they view that it must work. I just have a feeling. I don't want a drug dealer, my kids to get access to drugs. They are already having access to drugs. Your kid is already being educated by drug dealers on what's going on. It's there, it doesn't work. And does the world take notice? No, because they're not looking at outcome. They're looking at feelings and beliefs and all kinds of things. They're not looking at outcome. And we are now seeing there's a turn in the world. More and more countries are starting to accept a new set of laws and things for how they're going to make cannabis more and more available. Is it because they want people to use freely drugs? No, I don't think so. I think they want to bring the drug problem down. By shunning it did not work. And there's other systems or other systems that seems to work a lot better. A lot of countries that have stopped this war on drugs has got better outcomes. So by concentrating on what is true and how we know it, like outcome is for me a much better thing. We can have any debate about any topic, but we cannot really have an honest debate if you pitch up with your feelings and your beliefs and it must just be accepted because you feel it's that important. Where's the evidence? Anybody else? Or Claire, would you like to respond to that?
No, I agree totally. But I think what is important is to say, coming back, why do humans have moral value? Why? What is the purpose of it? It has to have a purpose. And to base on this, say, yes, that is one or not. And for Raoul, who mentioned, for instance, that humanistic values could be narrow and selfish, and for instance, not considering the animals or the nature, I here disagree, because the nature, the healthy nature in the wide sense is part of what is needed for human beings to prosper in a better way. We know we are part of nature and nature must be healthy for us to be healthy. So it's in my sense, again, part of a humanistic value. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I see the people bring up the word morals and what is our morals and why do we have morals and these things up a lot. Now, first of all, you must understand, I am not I haven't studied all of these things, right? I am a pure novice that's just looked a little bit around me in the world and see what I think. And when I looked at what is morals and why do we have them, morals and culture, I find that even the experts, when they try to explain it, there's very wide differences or very wide views of what exactly is these morals and cultures. So for me, when I talk about things like moral and culture, it is almost like we as people are very, very successful in solving problems, right? We have created this world we live in by solving problems. But a lot of the time, people has almost forgotten what the problem was. They only remember the solution. So for me, if you talk about culture, it is the way people solve the problem by just following a preset of solutions when they've already forgot the problem. Like take, for instance, the example of just how we greet each other. We greet each other different ways in different countries. If you trace it back, why do you greet it? Why is it that people shake hands or whatever? It's to get their hands off the sword. You know, I'm like making it super simple now because I don't want to go in the detail. In Japanese, they bow because they show a vulnerable spot in their armor to show that they don't mean any harm right now. They said you solved a specific problem of to show that you don't mean you're going to fight the other guy when you meet them. That's how these solutions. Nowadays, we shake hands and nobody's got a sword. We bow, but nobody's got armor on. So it's like we forgot this problem, but we only have the solution. And it is also then in our nature to be almost have these solutions in it. Like for instance, if you see something moving in the grass, you jump. Because why? You know it's a snake, or it could be a snake. And it's better to jump and then find out it's not a snake than it is to be bitten by the snake and die. So you have this built-in moral values, moral feelings that you can react very, very quickly in a situation without having to think. But is it that just because you have it in you, does it mean it's the right moral values? Yes or no? And we know that people are not born with the correct set of moral values. Why? Because there's not one moral value that has been consistent through all societies, all civilizations, and all people. There is no objective moral value that we have. Every moral value we have is subjective. We can make it up and we can train ourselves, we can inherit it and then have it ready for when we need it without having to think. That's how moral values is in us. So I'd forgotten actually the point I was trying to make clear in trying to answer you. But the thing is that people bring up always these moral values. And I don't think we always have a discussion, why do we have moral values? I just think moral values is the set of solutions you have when you don't always have to think about the problem anymore. And most people, like you say, they are not interested in having this debate about facts and reasons and analysis and all these things. They just want the answer. But it's important for us that is interested in these things to understand that our answer is based on evidence. How do you know it's true? How do you know that your moral value, your ideas are leading to the desired outcome of well-being of our society? If you don't bring that to the table, I don't think your moral views, moral values, moral ideas has legitimacy. And this is why, for instance, it was also brought up that you getting more and more religious people that inherits humanist moral values. The first question is why? Well, obviously it's because they see that these humanist societies are more successful than their societies. So they are starting to change their religious beliefs, right? But they are still, in my view, dishonest because they are still just basing it on belief rather than evidence. We as humanists, we as the people that's interested in why we have our moral values, is basing it on evidence, outcome evidence. How do you know it's true? Would you like to comment on that, Claire or Raul?
Yeah, I think I think, well, yeah, we should definitely use evidence. I'm very pro-evidence. Not going to get an argument from me there. I do think that, I mean, it's important to, like, with a lot of issues today, it's not merely a debate about, like, oh, this side has evidence, this side doesn't. It's often there's a conflict of values, you know, involved. Abortion being a good example. And so, like, a lot of it is, it's more than just evidence. It's how we reason through the debate. You have to apply some philosophy. You got to argue which outcome is better than the other, and at which point, maybe, you know, and have that discussion. And I think that broader approach to it is humanism. That's the umbrella that we kind of fall under when we say humanism. So it's not really just having the answer, but it's having just a way to get to the answer without resorting to holy books or superstition and feelings. It's using reason, evidence, and science. So yeah.
The other thing that I've also come to a conclusion is that if I look at the countries, if I start off with that thing about my argument again, I look at all the countries in the world I would not mind to live in, countries that I feel have my type of values, that value the humans in their society, and that have these values that they implement. I do find that it is not a whole bunch of a variety of values, and these values are sometimes contradictory. I do not find that. If I look at the most successful countries, that it's almost like they have more or less got the same set of values. I mean, yes, there's lower down, there might be a differences of opinion and a variety of things, but the core values seems to be all the same. So I very much, and it's open for people to say, give me examples of a bunch of countries that they think is very good countries where we could aspire, where South Africa could aspire to be like, and that have a diversity of humanist moral values. I don't find that. I find that they have the exact same set of values. And as we have now started to clearly define those values, we are seeing it as it's permeating through all the institutions of the world, like the United Nations are starting to very much implement these values, and other organizations. That is my view, how I see it. Is there anybody that think there is moral values that we can be on both ends of the spectrum and still have humanist moral values that back it up through evidence? Sarah?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, countries have different, like, punishments for crimes, for example. So we can argue about what's a fair duration for punishment in terms of imprisonment. We talk about, like, what is good imprisonment and what isn't. Should it be reformation or just punishment in a cell doing nothing? I mean, most of this falls into politics. It's where, how do we actually, you know, solve these issues, like, on the ground level? I think another one where countries would differ, and it would be humanist the whole way, is on questions of free speech and freedom of expression. To what extent should certain speech be censored, or hateful speech be punished legally or otherwise? I think all of this would fall within humanism, but humanism itself wouldn't be able to solve it. You'd have to appeal to a third value, like whether you're prioritizing dignity or inclusiveness or something. Yeah, but it's not a bad thing that, you know, we have those conversations. I prefer having those conversations as to whether or not you know, stoning of women is appropriate or not. Yeah. So.
Right. So let's talk about specific issues, because, you know, these things, I get super excited about these things in debates, and I don't want to sit here for an hour talking to people and they go like, man, we're not really that interested. But if you talk about prison and prison reform, we know that Finland is one of the countries with the lowest reoffending rate in the world. This is people coming out of prison. What is the chances of them committing the crime? They're one of the lowest. So how can another country sit there and say, in my prison system, I have very good ideas and things, and yet there's a sky high? Like, we know that the United States of America is the country that's imprisoned a bigger percentage of their population than any other dictator or civilization in history. Like, you take the most brutal systems there was out there, and nobody matches the United States on the level of incarceration of its citizens. It is at staggering levels. Would you call that a safe society if you look at all these gun shootings and how they're going crazy in that? Is that the society you would like to aspire to live in? And yet, a country like Finland that have shown us a clear path of how to implement a prison system. Why not that? They've got the lowest level of incarceration. The lowest level of reoffending afterwards. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at Google their stories a little bit. They've got one prison, right? That's got 3 fences. 3 out of the 4 fences is there. Now, you think that immediately when I say something like this is like the lowest level of offender. Like you put different types of criminals in different types of jails. No. This is the highest level. This is the murderers and people like that. They put them in a jail with 3 fences. And they have a few hundred of these people in that jail. And yet, over a weekend, they will have maybe 4 prison officers looking after a few hundred criminals, hardened criminals, that's murderers. And you think, how is that possible? How can somebody do that? Right? If you're interested in that, go look up at Finland and how their system works. And the answer is simple. They started off with a question. Once these people get out of jail, they will be your neighbor. How are you going to treat somebody in jail that is going to be your neighbor? That was where they started off when they started with their prison reforms. And starting from that point of view, they created a system with the lowest amount of reoffending in the world. And people shun it because they just cannot see it to work in their countries. And the question is why? Why is it that people can shun the outcome? Because they just cannot believe that it will work. Claire.
You realize that in some countries, people want to go to prison because there they have at least 1 meal a day. No comment.
That's a good point. But that's a country that's very down the level of how much they are able to care for their people. Right. Anybody else with like a question or a comment or thing? I hope when I explained it to you, I gave you enough thought. So when you go and look a little bit further on the internet, when you research a little bit humanism and what humanism is all about, that you can see that even though people talk about a lot of things, the core value of humanism is well-being for humans based on evidence. Without it being based on evidence, we are back to beliefs. Anything goes. I think this is something that I would really like to make sure people understand if they look further into the topic of humanism. And then once you understand that that humanists have a reason for their values, you will also feel maybe a little bit more emboldened, maybe a little bit more confident to implement that in the society around you, to bring it up and talk to people about it, without even having to bring up the label you're a humanist. I find it that if I say to people around me, like at work, like a typical example would be at work, if I stand up for my moral values, nobody disagrees with me. Most people will either keep quiet, I don't know, so I don't know what their opinion is, or they will agree with me and say, yes, we agree with you. And they don't always realize that these things are contrary to their religion. They don't always realize it. They have also reached the point where they are accepting it, even though they're still religious. But I have the conviction to stand up for my moral values because I understand on what it is based. It's based on achieving well-being, and it's backed up by evidence. There's nobody else that would like to have a comment. I think we can end this meeting. I'll just have a last little bit. I don't know if Rick is still available. I'd just like to say the last few things about SASS to the people that is new. So let's ask for last comments. Going, gone. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for joining this meeting. I don't know whether you really enjoyed it or whether you just had to tolerate me talking a lot about the things I feel very, very passionate about. SASS is an organization for the non-religious. The people in South Africa, we feel we need to have a community where we can come together, where we can talk. Oh, there's one hand going up. But there,
yes, yeah, the hammer went down too quickly.
okay. Yes, go for it.
Yes, yeah, I'm new to SASS.
Yes.
I actually joined a couple of months ago or something, but somehow I've not gotten the emails to join a meeting. But when I saw this during the week, I said I'll join. And the reason I joined SASS is simply to see if I can meet a community of like-minded people.
Yes.
And the conversations that have gone on in this forum today confirm that, and I look forward to participating in many more.
Right. Thank you very much. So let me just tell you quickly a little bit about SASS for the people that is new. So SASS is an organization that we created, like we said, for the non-religious. And we decided to create this thing because we were also sitting in forums like this, talking and talking and talking, and we said, but nobody's doing something. So SASS is about doing something. But for SASS to be able to do things, we need members that step up to do it. You are the legs of the organization. Without you doing something, SASS will cease to exist. I must tell you, as an EXCO member of SASS, you don't know how much effort it is just to keep the organization from existing. Like, we are about exhausted. So the SASS member, the EXCO does not have enough left in the tank anymore to actually go out there and make things happen for SASS. If you guys want things to happen for SASS has to have an impact on the society we live in. We are really, really asking for members to step up to the plate. One of our most successful projects that we have is the marriage officers things, where we're not the first organization in South Africa that got people to be marriage officiants for the non-religious, but we are definitely now the most active with the biggest group of marriage officers. The other organizations that did it, they did it like for 1 or 2 people. That was it. We now have, I can't remember the exact number now, but over 20 qualified marriage officers and maybe something like 30 in the process of becoming marriage officers. So we are making huge strides. We have other projects, one where we are tackling schools and the question of religion in schools, the discrimination in schools on the religious grounds. Projects like this, where we are trying to influence the system, we're even trying to develop a education material for schools. That project is a little bit running into a few problems, but we are trying to physically do things. One of the things that we're also trying to very much do is having these types of meetups, either online where anybody can join, but specifically in person. Now that COVID is over, we definitely need to go down to local meetups in your local area where people can meet each other face to face, so that we can create a community where people can belong and freely associate and freely talk and freely share ideas. But these things are not going to happen if members of the organization does not step up to the plate and help us. You are the legs of this organization. So I ask you to please join us on our different platforms. We have Meetup, we have Facebook, we have WhatsApp, we have, sorry, we don't use WhatsApp, we use Telegram. We have Telegram, that where we would like to share and come together, but also we would like to do it in person. So I implore you to please join us and become an active volunteer in our organization. You can email us, you can find us, you can go to our website. And also, like with any other organization in the world, we need money, right? Now, I can't tell you that I can promise you an afterlife and rewards of gold and all kinds of things in the afterlife if you pay me up now, or I can't guilt you into this. This has to be something that you feel passionately about, to join us as a paying volunteer, as a paying member, and hopefully as a volunteer, because we need money to make some of these things happen. Unfortunately, it costs money. So I thank you. We had the hour-and-a-half meeting. I hope you enjoyed it. I talked a lot, I know. I feel passionate about these things. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think I had up to something like 17 participants. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Melanie would like to say one last thing. Melanie, it's over to you.
Wilhelm, I just want you to elaborate on what the costs are. It's no good saying money and then new people are terrified thinking it's 1,000 Rand a month. Just
okay. It's 100 Rand a month, or an annual fee of 1,000 Rand annually. So, but it's 100 Rand a month. That's all that we require from members. We try to make it as cheap as possible to try to change South Africa.
But we will accept more.
Yeah. We had our first person that we're in the process of the probate process that actually left us something in their will. So yeah, people, there are some people that feel very, very passionate about that. But thank you very much. Rick, is there any last thing you'd like to say?
No, you've done very well. I think I would just add that, where can you get hold of us? Online at secularsociety, all one word, .org.za. You will see a piece of it behind me, secularsociety.org.za. In fact, the co.za still works as well. So go there, explore, make contact. You will find links to the Telegram group there. There is what we call a lobby if you want to come into the Telegram groups, because we try to keep spammers and traders out. So you'll go into the lobby. You just have to tell us who you are and the fact that you're an atheist or a humanist or something along those lines, and we will give you the list of our extensive Telegram groups, which you're very welcome to join. And otherwise, you've done very well, Wilhelm. Don't know why I do these things when you can do so much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Right.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending. We had up to 18 participants, which is a local record, I think. So obviously a topic that interests people. We'll do it again sometime. Look out for next month's topic in your messages. and thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful Sunday. See you online. Goodbye.